Sponsoring the podcast today is Sempra Services. Greenhouse gas emissions impact us all. In this new podcast series, former San Diego County Planning Commissioner and renewable energy and transportation expert Peter Norby explores best practices for reducing greenhouse gases and making real progress toward a healthier future on the local level. In this episode, Norby sits down with a renowned economist and Point Loma Nazarene professor, Dr. Lynn Reeser, to discuss the implications of government-controlled energy in San Diego. Visit sempraservices.com to learn more and tune into the podcast on iTunes or Stitcher. Welcome to the Voice of San Diego podcast, where we make sense of local politics, schools, housing, public safety, the civic issues that impact the life of a San Diego resident. We break it down so you can understand it and make educated decisions.
Everything that goes into our investigative reporting, the journalists, public records requests, the data crunching, and this very show depends on the support of people like you because we're a nonprofit news organization. Enjoy the show.
Okay, welcome to those of you listening on News Radio 600 Kogo. My name is Scott Lewis. I'm here with my friend Andrew Keats.
What's up, buddy?
What's up, brother?
Not a lot.
And amiga Sarah Libby.
What's up?
How are you?
Good.
I got back from Philadelphia. Can I just say something?
Yeah.
I know you expected me to talk about it, so I'm going to talk about
Sure.
it. It's cold.
Yeah.
It's really cold. How do people live in those places?
I know.
You put on a lot of clothes.
I
and
arrived there.
boots.
And I walked out of the hotel, and I was like, it was so cold. And I walked to the place I was going to go eat, and there was a sporting goods store on the way, and I went in and bought long johns and put them on because it was hurt. It hurt.
Yeah, one of the more cliched things about me as a San Diegan is my tolerance level for anything below like 50 degrees.
Yeah.
It's really cold and uncomfortable, and I've made conscious decisions not to subject myself to it because it's painful. I don't like it.
I thought I was good at it, and I was like, that'd be fine. Everybody's like, "Is me calling my long underwear or something?" And I'm like, nah, come on, you can handle this. I used to ski in like a t-shirt. Nothing.
I like situations that require a lot of clothes.
You're good at clothes,
Yeah.
though. I'm not.
It's
I'm only
my
now.
favorite.
I'm 40 years into my life. I'm only now getting better at it.
I would acknowledge that preparations are an important part of dealing with it, and that's not a strength in my life in general, and it has never been as far as the weather is concerned either.
I just want to say one thing about Philadelphia. The City Hall is magnificent. It is just a beautiful building, and it's gigantic, and it's just there like just a big, ornate, inspiring building, and it was lit up perfectly for that time of year and the Christmas and all that. It was just something else, and I just couldn't help but be terribly embarrassed about the thing that's kitty corner from our office here. It's just not an impressive building. Yeah, it's newer. It's newer.
Yeah, I mean, the West Coast is better than the East Coast, but the East Coast still does some things better, and like beautiful civic buildings is one of them.
I think in the mid...
is walking on the sidewalk.
Right. In the mid 20th century, something happened in like architecture, and it was just bad. Like so bad.
Yeah, that's true. I will say that it's nice that talking about how terrible City Hall is like one of the few things you can do without anyone disagreeing with you. Yeah. Like there's no group of people who's like, no, it's nice.
I'll never forget.
It's like you have carte blanche to just crush City Hall.
I'll never forget. Jim Madaffer used to be a city council member, and there was a minor earthquake. It must have been like 2006 or something. And there's video of him in the council, and this earthquake happens, and he just beelines it out like as though he's going to get down like 12 floors in time or something. But the look on his face was just like George Costanza on like, the fire breaks out or whatever. I mean, it was just, and it was classic because everybody's just, it's a big joke. Like, oh, if something happens, this place is done. It's like, well, that's kind of an important building. Maybe we should think about it. All right, so we've got a really good show. We're doing our Voices of the Year, and I'm excited about that. We're going to run through them and have some clips pulled. Many of them have been on our show, coincidentally. That's where they, obviously where their voice was first heard,
obviously,
and took hold. I just have a little sort of end of the year Christmas message I wanted to talk about real quick. So bear with me here. A little opening rant. All right. So I've been speaking at a lot of schools, students, talking to people lately, and I've been trying to think of a new sort of speech that I could give. I had an old one. I'm trying to get a new one.
Sources going direct.
You've heard it.
Yeah.
So this one I've been trying to attach to like democracy. What's the point of local journalism? What's the point of journalism? And to me, the point of journalism is to, at least in part, to construct a shared reality of everything that we think is true or that we understand. And the reason that that's important is that we all have to make decisions out of that shared reality, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it's not that we're the voice of God. Like we're not omniscient. We don't know everything, right? Do you? I don't
think so.
You know everything.
I do know
here.
a lot though.
You do, right?
Yeah.
When it comes to like the amateur trials for Olympic track athletes,
yeah,
you're pretty omniscient.
I know a lot.
So yeah, we're constrained by our feeble little minds, but what we try to do is figure out what's going on, right? We go out, we figure it out, we come back, and we have a system for how we tell people what to do. And, we expect if we make a mistake that people will call us on it and we'll fix it. We expect people who call out our work to do the same. I don't really care much for people who respond to something they don't like by attacking the speaker's credibility, right? And integrity rather than their actual arguments. Like get into that. Now you may need to do their integrity or personal corruption or whatever, but you better have your data loaded, right? You better come strong.
Yeah.
But otherwise, like argue with what they've said, argue with what they've put out there. So we also support other media. They're contributing to this story, this shared reality that we have. We promote and highlight their work proudly. I think that by calling each other out and promoting each other, we can achieve the most robust public affairs culture possible. This is just kind of a bedrock. This is the bedrock of civic dialogue, in my opinion. If we all want to have a voice in local public affairs, we need to organize that voice as best we can. That's why I'm so obsessed with public affairs events that celebrate debate and common experience. And I swear, Andy, I'm going to get it right one day. Mm-hmm. We're going to have a true, awesome festival of ideas and discussion. Trust me.
Okay.
Set your calendar for like 5 years from now, all right? So I really want it to be a culture that we celebrate. At its heart, sharing news is a convening. Modern newspapers may be old, maybe not that old, but the act of gathering people together and telling them what you have learned and asking them to share what they have learned is as old as any human progress. It's not easy for us to live together. We all have different views, but we all have committed to living together in peace, and we decided that the best way to do that and to be peaceful is to make a system out of it, to make a system we call representative democracy. We decided that's the best way for all of us to get together, express our points of view on policy and politics, and then try to establish them without resorting to violence and corruption. And this is my point with the kids. Like, I always ask them, like, what's the point of democracy? And the point is that we can all get together. We're all different. We can settle on how we're going to run things without killing each other, right? That's the whole point. And if people get dissatisfied, then they might turn to violence, but that's the point, is to try to stop that. That's the point of the rule of law. So the news is a system, is the nourishment for that system. It's the nourishment for that, how we coexist. And I think the part of the point is with the rule of law and all this system is that if we follow that, we accept that if certain interests or politicians or political groups lose, they will accept it, right? That's at the heart of this whole system, is that you lose an election, you lose a policy debate, you will accept it, you will follow the rule of law that's been set, and then you will play the rules and play the game to get back into power to change it if you want, right?
Mm-hmm.
These aren't biblical rules. This isn't, again, the word of God. These are principles that our ancestors have handed down as they work to build a system that we could all live in and prosper with. We've only gotten it as far as we've gotten it, and as a species, we are cursed and blessed with, and I've been obsessed with this, with perennial dissatisfaction. Our society is never good enough, and we will always face every lurch toward equality or opportunity, equality of opportunity, with suspicion, and sometimes we will get wildly off track. We sometimes go backwards, right? But clearly, the trajectory is to continue to press forward on these concepts and to try to hand them down in the next generation to the next generation in a coherent way. It's not clear that we're on the right track right now. Media's full of some nasty stuff right now.
Yeah, I mean, I guess one question is these things that you say, bedrock principles of shared civil discourse. Is it that we're learning that we felt that way, and maybe some people for a long time felt that way, but increasingly people do not feel that way?
I mean, I think that's the worry, right?
Yeah, I mean,
I think that's the point. That's why we have to think about why we're doing everything. Like, it feels like we've been kind of on autopilot. Like, it's just been assumed, like, well, news is good and shared civil discourse is good and democracy is good. And I think we just need to articulate why.
Yeah, I mean, I think what I increasingly recognize is that people just resent what we do and the way we do it, and the idea that we are self-appointed referees, and that resentment has turned into rage.
Fair enough. I think that's clear. But I don't think we have any choice but to continue to work on it, right? Like, that's the whole, I mean, we can give up and say, man, you're mad at us. Like, I guess we're done. I guess we're done with this, right? But I'm not. I think that's why I'm so grateful, and that's why I wanted to reflect right now. I'm grateful for our staff, the people who donate to Voice San Diego, our stakeholders. I mean, inside Voice San Diego, we're perennially dissatisfied too. Like, I get tremendous pressure every day to increase our presence, our reach in the community, the money we raise, the resources we have for reporters and the salaries, everything. So how do we expand, diversify our staff, achieve personal goals?
We fight with each other about the best way to cover a story and how to cover a story and whether a story is hitting the right notes and is good. We acknowledge sometimes when we haven't done a great job and try to take another shot at it. Like, we are not under the impression at all that things are smooth sailing and we're doing very, everything we need to be doing. Absolutely
not. I mean, one of the things I always tell people is we're only as good at Voice San Diego as we have gotten.
Mm-hmm.
Like, the whole point is to keep getting better and keep, and sometimes I go back, like you said, sometimes we make big major mistakes. Something goes wrong, our operation changes or something like that. But at least we try to learn from it and improve, take better care of ourselves. Everything I personally do is about that. I'm always trying to get better. Finally, like I said, clothes. I'm better at clothes. You should try it, Andy.
It's a good burn.
All right. So look, Voice of San Diego has an excellent staff again. It's been a crazy year. We've changed a lot. We're doing our own expansion, our own progress. Look, I do feel that tremendous pressure to find more donors and supporters all the time. But I just wanted to stop right now and say, look, for those of you who believe in this vision of a shared reality of everybody contributing, everybody holding each other accountable, but at the end of the day, following the rules and peacefully living together and trying to create a diverse discussion, I just wanted to say thanks. Like, I appreciate that so many people support this service, and we're doing our last end of the month pledge drive, trying to get as much money into this bank account as we can so we can do all this work next year. Please consider supporting it. But that's not what this was about. This was just about, let's remember to always try to articulate what the whole point of all this is, right? Cool?
Yeah.
Thanks, guys. All right. So, Sarah, you're the best at articulating this, I think. Tell the people what we try to do with the Voices of the Year.
Yeah, so we do a lot of different end of the year look backs at various topics and, what changed in terms of housing and water and things like that. But this was more an effort several years ago that we started to kind of recognize and surface the big conversations that happened in San Diego about, that shared reality and our future. So we call it Voice of the Year. And I think the biggest thing to keep in mind when you're reading or thinking about this list of people is that it's not necessarily an award or an honor. We're not saying like these people did the most wonderful things, but they provoked big conversations. And, the first year that we did it, it was actually like a really easy one to pinpoint. It was Bob Filner, and he's certainly not somebody who that year was deserving of an award or an honor, but he absolutely dominated all of our civic discourse that year. And so through the years, it's been harder, most years, to kind of pinpoint a specific person or a group, but we sit down as a staff and we usually have a pretty good and often intense discussion. And every year it's gone a different way than I thought it would going into it.
Just a quick point on the thing that you mentioned about, it's not being an award. That was sort of crystallized, I think, by a comment I got on Twitter where a woman said, or a person on Twitter said, you gave the accusers of Mickey Kasparian one of these recognitions, and we'll talk about that later. Mickey Kasparian's labor leader, but you also did it for a guy in labor who supported him. Isn't that aren't you contradictory? And I think that's the point. No, that's not an award. It's not like we gave one person an award and another person contradictory award. It was that they both literally had an impact that we couldn't deny on the local discussion.
Yeah, it is an attempt to take a snapshot of the people who drove conversation in the city during a particular year.
Yeah, and it's usually for a specific reason, although some people, as we'll talk about with the main voice of the year, were involved in, a handful of really big discussions, but usually it's for taking a role in a specific, big discussion that happened in San Diego. So with the example of that labor leader, he was involved in a lot of issues with the county that people were really talking about this year, and we didn't say, we highlighted him because he also supports this guy accused of sexual harassment.
All right, should we do it?
Yep.
Our voice of the year for 2017 was Mara Elliott. She's the city attorney at the city of San Diego. I think it was the one I went in thinking would probably win. So did you think that went differently than you thought?
This one went differently because I think there was very little discussion and debate.
Yeah.
We all said, there's no one who's provoked more intense
You
conversations.
weren't totally
than Mara.
sure, right, Andy?
Well, I just wanted to make sure we talked it out.
Yeah.
Because I think everybody walked into the room thinking that she was, and I said before we fall victim to this level of groupthink, let's at least have the conversation.
Right. All right, so look, let's start with the idea that she started running for city attorney basically with this vision of it being a much less political agency, right? That this was just going to be, she was going to blend in. She expressed nostalgia for the system at the county of San Diego. She was on this show doing just that, talking about what she remembers about the county of San Diego, where she served as in the council's office there. Now, the county does not have an elected city attorney. It's an appointed county council. And here's how she described that.
I liked the county. Everything was real smooth. It took a lot of getting used to when I came to the city. It's a very different animal.
Yeah.
And we were just lawyers there.
Yeah.
And it worked. But I think both the current county council and the past county council didn't need to take credit for the good things that the county achieved, and nobody necessarily knew who they were.
They know who City Attorney Mara Elliott is. Very much so, right?
Yeah.
They're not just lawyers.
No, the most prominent thing that she did was she declared vacation rentals illegal. But that was just one of 5 or 6 things that really stood out for us, right?
Yeah. I mean, I think we could go through all of them, but the one thing I want to point out is every city attorney almost feels like they're obligated, it seems, to assert that they will not drive policy through their legal interpretations. And I don't know if it's that they find out that that's an impossible standard to meet, and that just by virtue of giving legal interpretations, you necessarily shape policy, or if the impulse to be a driver of policy is too great to overcome, or some other factor. But just time after time, we see that no matter what somebody in this position says about wanting not to unduly influence the making of policy, they all do.
Yeah.
They all do. And Mara Elliott, maybe even more so than her predecessor.
Right.
And I would also want to add that, like, it's fine. It's perfectly fine to do that. I don't need to I don't. It doesn't need to be bad. It doesn't need to be a pejorative to say you as the city attorney are shaping policy. It's your position is what it is. We have an elected city attorney. As long as that's the case, just do it. The only issue comes in when you say that you won't.
Yeah, I know in law there's the jurisprudence ideal of you just interpret the law, right? You this is what it says. This is what the Constitution says. This is what the courts have ruled. But, I mean, all you have to do is look at the Supreme Court of the United States, and it's divided on ideological lines precisely because different brains see those things differently, right?
Yeah, I mean, presumably we could feed a set of facts into a machine and it could spit out a interpretation, but we don't do that. We have human judges and lawyers who interpret things a number of different ways.
Yeah.
Right.
And the thing that she interpreted, again, that was really a big one in the city was this thing where vacation rentals, short-term vacation rentals, are just illegal. It was just a one-page memo. It was really shocking. If it was such a big deal, here was Chris Cate, a city council member. He came in to talk to us about it, and this is what his reaction was to that memo.
To be honest, I was wondering if I didn't print out the rest of the pages, only for the fact that the last memo that was done by Jan Goldsmith, as well as the one by Micah Geary, were very detailed in their explanation of what the current situation was with our municipal code and the zoning and why that they believe we were in this gray area. And I think to come out and be very blunt that this use is illegal without really any explanation about why your two predecessors were wrong and why you're right there's something left to be desired.
And I think that was illustrative of how big a deal that her interpretation has been. Okay, we're going to take a quick break. For those of you listening on News Radio 600 Co, thank you. You can always get us on the podcast and follow us at voiceofsandiego.org.
Voice of San Diego podcasts are made possible in part by Downtown San Diego Partnership. 'Tis the season to make your change count at one of downtown San Diego's 26 red donation station meters. From providing homeless individuals with hygiene kits, new clothes, and meal cards, to helping those on the street take the first steps into permanent housing, your spare change can make a difference in the lives of those who need it most this holiday season. Visit downtownsandiego.org for more information and to donate today.
All right, so as we were departing the previous portion of the show, Chris Cate had just laid out his explanation for why he thought that this legal interpretation was so disruptive. Now, that was months before another major issue between Chris Cate and the city attorney would come up. Maybe it foreshadowed that a little bit that they were.
Yeah, it feels like it's sowing the seeds a little bit. You can hear now in hindsight a little resentment, like, why didn't you explain this if, you know, these two previous city attorneys thought it was so different? Right.
And so that relationship became another thing that she had a gigantic role in this year, which was on Soccer City, another big project in the city that sucked up a lot of airtime, basically. She issued a public memo outlining a lot of problems with it that she saw.
Very tersely worded. She did not like this plan. I mean, it wasn't just like, hey, here's some legal issues. Like, this was point by point FAQ style. Yeah. This is what's
easy
wrong
to read. You didn't need a law degree to understand it.
It was a column about how bad or questionable the project was legally.
Right, which was itself another salvo into city politics this year. But then she also put forward a confidential memo to members of the city council. Chris Cate took that confidential memo, provided it to Soccer City, and Mara Elliott took to the airwaves to declare that that was a egregious breach of trust and that she could no longer trust her own client.
And yeah, that's again her client. So and that's his lawyer. So
Yeah.
that's a big thing. And it's the kind of thing that again you saw with City Attorney Micah Geary way back when he was the first to sort of in a modern time sort of realize the power of that office, that you could flex these legal interpretations to the point where you are quite important in the city structure.
Yeah, and so I mean, she pushed that issue to the district attorney's office, asking for a criminal prosecution against Chris Cate for having done this. Now, the district attorney has recused herself, and it is now at the attorney general. We'll see where that goes. Certainly, if that goes somewhere, it could have a major influence on the Chris Cate's 2018 re-election prospects.
All right, so one last, I think this is good just for nostalgia too. Again, this is Mara Elliott reflecting before she was elected on what she thinks the role of the city attorney's office is.
I see our role as a city attorney as looking at the legality of something.
Mm-hmm.
And even if it's a bad idea, not having that ability to undo it. So we should be assessing whether the deal that's been struck is legal, but that's it.
That's it. See how that holds up, huh? All right, next one we wanted to highlight was Stephanie Crow's family. So we're in this world. Mara Elliott has endorsed in the city attorney's race Summer Stephan, along with a bunch of other people in the city
District attorney's race.
Sorry, district attorney's race. This is one of the most powerful elected positions in this region. Oversees all of the prosecutions of felonies throughout the region and misdemeanors, except in the city of San Diego. Obviously, a major agency. Summer Stephan was a major deputy to the former district attorney, Bonnie Dumanis, and Bonnie Dumanis abruptly resigned and said Summer should be in my spot, and she was being put towards this spot.
This interim DA position,
Right.
which may not be an interim DA position if Summer Stephan wins the election next year.
Exactly. So it's a very important spot to be in if you want to run for DA. Helps.
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, as we saw with Mara, having that title on the ballot of you're already a city attorney or you're already the interim DA can be quite helpful.
Yeah, quite. And so she seemed to be on the road of this easy sort of, taking of the mantle to be the district attorney for a long time. And then while that appointment process was going forward, an old case, one of the cases that captured San Diego's attention for years, the murder of Stephanie Crow in her house, a young girl in Escondido, right? She was murdered. There was a horrible botching of the prosecution of her brother and his friends. Then there was the botching of the prosecution of a homeless man who was blamed for the murder. It was just a mess. And Summer Stephan was a big part of that. And in fact, Bonnie Dumanis ran for her job, for the district attorney's job, based in part on how bad this high-profile prosecution had gone.
Yeah, under the previous DA, right?
Right. And so this thing has haunted Summer Stephan, and it came back. And so one of the voices of the year, again, we do the main voice of the year, but then we have a bunch of others, and this was one of the others, was Stephanie Crow's family. So Cheryl Crow, Stephanie Crow's mother, showed up at the county to lobby against Summer Stephan's appointment to this interim position, and here's what she said.
My daughter Stephanie's in a grave. She was murdered. Her killer got away with it. I think it would have been a lot different if Summer Stephan had not been assigned to the case. She spent a page and a half in her application of explaining how her handling of my daughter's case showed how compassionate, ethical, and competent she was. In truth, she was mean, unethical, and incompetent.
And so this provoked, a really interesting conversation about the process itself, because, like you said, Bonnie Dumanis' departure was really unexpected and abrupt, and it really seemed for a period of time like she was going to just kind of wave her hand and Summer Stephan, her chosen successor, was going to just stroll right into this really important office. And this was pretty much the only thing that stopped that from happening. There were, a few other candidates who applied, but I don't think anyone really thought that they had much of a chance. And so this at least forced a conversation about how that process works. And like you said, the power of incumbency with this office is such a big deal, that at least, people stopped and talked for a moment about how it worked, even though Summer Stephan ultimately was still appointed.
It didn't stop her appointment, but the family, Stephanie Crow's family, also released a really detailed memo about why both she shouldn't be appointed, but also what her direct responsibility was. The whole thing provoked us to do an investigation about just what the truth was about what her involvement was or was not. It's a great story by Ashley McGlone, and it really highlighted some of the things that she says she didn't have a role over. It's pretty clear she did. She was a maiden prosecutor, and she had a lot of statements on the record at that time. She did not want to talk to us about it, but it's a good rundown of the whole case, what went wrong with the prosecutions, and so check that out. But again, the impact of that discussion, I think, is still to be told, and how big of a deal it becomes in the race, right? All right, our next Voice of the Year, this goes to Dan Shea and Peter Seidler. Dan is a restaurateur and the owner of Donovan Steakhouse. Peter Seidler, of course, part owner of the Padres. And they were among a group of business people that kind of got whittled down to them too. Really were just major advocates to do something about the homelessness downtown, but specifically to find shelter for the people who were on the street as soon as possible. And they ran into a ton of problems, difficulties with the mayor, and with the city council, and just trying to get this. They really started settling on the idea that there had to be shelter. There had to be some kind of tent or something, or they were for a while talking about the old downtown library. Could that be transformed? Now, one of the problems with this, of course, is that this city and a bunch of others have been heading towards this housing first model, right? This idea that you shouldn't try to put people in tents or in transitional shelters. You should get them into a home that's theirs, and then everything else is easier to fix after that. And Dan Shea was asked about this on KPBS. We're committed to this path, and why are we going to try to put up tents and stuff in the meantime? And he said this.
We support housing first. We think it's a great concept. However, housing first for the number of people that are on the streets is not going to happen mathematically for 5 to 10 years. So the question becomes one of, do we just leave those people on the street for 5 years, 7 years, 10 years, waiting to have housing built, or do we have a bridge to housing first?
I mean, there's a point to that, right? Like, we've been talking about the vast housing supply problem for a long time. Even if you did everything possible to spur construction of housing, the rate at which it would have an impact on these sorts of problems seems like years off, right?
Right. And I mean, I think one of the counter arguments is that you lose some incentive to force the action that's required. Right. By taking these interim steps. It's just odd to think of people living on the streets as political leverage.
Right. Right. Yeah. And that's what he tapped into, right? And he and Peter Seidler then pushed so hard. And I really think they exemplified this point about a vacuum in city leadership, right? They didn't feel like the mayor and others were leading on this thing.
Yeah, there's all kinds of people who presumably could be leaders on homelessness in San Diego. There's a regional task force that has a leader. There's a city council committee that has a head, and there's a mayor. And yet these two businessmen rose to the top because they just saw that, not enough was happening for their taste.
And I think they had an impact in the sense that when it finally got to the point where something had to be done because people were getting a disease that is spread by sewage, that they had this sort of tool ready. They had this idea ready, and the mayor grabbed it, right? And now there are 3 giant mega shelter tents going up. And, we can debate about the
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of people who don't think that those tents are a great policy solution,
Right.
And that's a fine debate to have. I just don't know that there's any question that these two guys forced that conversation to happen.
Right, and in the absence of real viable alternative to making sure the streets had fewer people camped out on them, this is what happened. Now they're mulling additional tents, ways to push more permanent housing progress, and planning other gatherings and other things. They also put their own money into these tents. So, yeah, they certainly had some impact. All right, next one, similar issue. This is Mike McConnell. Now, Mike McConnell, also a businessman, years ago decided that he wanted to be involved and try to address homelessness. Got involved as a philanthropist, later just started walking the streets with his social media accounts. I remember talking to him when he didn't know anything about social media. And next thing you know, he's one of the most prominent local advocates on Twitter and on Facebook. And he, for months was filming the sweeps that they were doing, was, trying to address some potential injustices here and there. And he's a big advocate for that housing first idea and was a critic of these tents and others. And we have a clip of him explaining sort of the imperative to end homelessness.
The solutions to homelessness benefit the entire community. They have a beautiful ripple effect. When you have less people becoming homeless, being homeless on your streets, going through your system, whatever it is, it benefits your entire community because they're actually in housing, they're participating in the economy, they're not a draw on tourism or any other parts of our economy or lifestyle, and they're actually participating in all of those things. So I love that ripple effect that happens when you reduce homelessness.
Okay, and so now Mike is currently working, or he paid for a poll. He is part of a group of people who has been involved in discussions about putting a ballot measure up in 2018 that would generate new revenue through a tax increase of some kind to pay for not only homelessness solutions and homelessness services, but also affordable housing. And that affordable housing was an absolute additional major focal point throughout the entire rest of the year.
Yeah, it's a big part of our Voices of the Year.
Yeah, and so one of those people who really pushed it was the director of the Partnership for the Advancement of New Americans, PANA. Her name's Ramla Saheed. We had her on the podcast once, and she was kind of at the intersection of two things that came up this year. One was obviously refugees became something that were in the news because of what was happening nationally, and then our own affordable housing issues. And when she was on the show, I think in this clip we're about to hear, she really put her finger on why those two things are connected, why those two issues are tied together.
What we do is we take that conversation and we actually say, what are the policies that contribute to creating these really broken systems that people have to then try and find services for? And how do we fix policy so that families are helped out and they are able to thrive in a region like San Diego? So when we talk about families, refugee families ending up in motels as their first home, what we're talking about, then why don't we have an adequate affordable housing stock for people?
And I think that's what catches people off guard, right? They talk to Ramla and they're like, oh, so what can we do to help the refugees and in that community? And, they're thinking they can bring like a pillow over or a thing of clothes
Box
or toys.
of diapers.
And she's like, you can fix the affordable housing problem and here's some ideas and
You could provide job training.
Yeah. So she's not interested, and I think you in your write up of her for the Voices of the Year thing, you talked about how she represents a real radical sort of not radical in the sense of like she's very thoughtful and ideological about what she wants to see happen in local government. Right?
Yeah, I mean, she doesn't necessarily, I wouldn't say that she disputes the need for expansion of market rate housing or increased supply. That's just not her issue. You can do that. That would be fine, or we can have a debate about it. Her issue is homes for very low income people,
rent control.
Rent control. She's willing to talk about rent control. She's willing to talk about raising taxes to build vastly more homes reserved for low-income people than we can provide right now. So the sort of neoliberal consensus around increasing housing supply overall by deregulation, I'm sure she finds common cause with people who support those things from time to time, but that's not the issue that brings her to city council.
I think it's going to be a real defining debate then over the next decade in San Diego is this tension, right? This sort of political policy push that's just about affordable housing, restricted income housing, like it's just constrained in what you can charge people.
Yeah.
Versus the more market-oriented liberals, and it's not going to be about Republicans versus Democrats. This is going to be an intra-democratic discussion in many ways.
Yeah, and one thing I hear often about people who self-describe YIMBYs is, well, why separate us at all? We YIMBYs support affordable housing, or at least most YIMBYs do. And that's true, but it's what is the thing that motivates you? What is your central reason for being? Is it building rent-controlled housing, or is it deregulating the overall housing, real estate system?
Right. All right, another voice of the year that we wanted to highlight. This is Loxie Gant. So Loxie came to us a couple years ago with a story idea that she had been frustrated for years. She had been in a physics class in high school in 2003 when a teacher grabbed her butt twice. Yeah. And she describes it vividly. And it was bad, and she complained about it. She left the class, and an investigator talked to her, and then nothing ever happened. And later, a decade later, she hears that he's still involved. Nothing ever happened. There was more girls, women complaining about what had happened to them, and he was still involved in it. And she comes to us and says, like, there's something here. You have to look into this. We tried for a long time, worked on it. Ashley McGlone worked on it, and then the Me Too movement happened. And describe for a second what that's doing, sort of to unleash a lot of these discussions.
Yeah, so when we looked back at this in 2015, we kind of hit walls on two different fronts. One, the district said we have no documents that would shed any light on this situation whatsoever. But the other, wall that we hit is a really common one when you're trying to report these stories, is that nobody wants to talk about this, particularly on the record. And so that was the biggest hurdle, I think, is that women were really afraid to talk about what had happened to them. They were really afraid to put their name to some of these issues and complaints and terrible things that they'd experienced. And so that is what changed in terms of people felt really empowered to come forward. And that's what really kind of broke this open for Ashley 2 years after we initially heard about it, is that at least 4 women were willing to say, put my name in this story. Here's what happened to me.
Yeah, everything from him, pretty clearly, deliberately brushing against their breast, to grabbing their hips, to tickling them. And the worst part about it is how they felt like just anxious and scared to go to his class. Just that idea of like, you can't, and it's not like it was optional for many of them. Once you're in his class and you're already accepted to a college, you're punished if you change classes, right?
Yeah, so he was the only person who taught this AP class. And, these are all a lot of ambitious kids at a very high-performing school. And so their only option really was to transfer to a lower-level class. And if, your college acceptance is contingent on an AP class, then that's not a real option.
Yeah, and so he retired last year. And so a lot of people say, well, no, that's over. The principal resigned too. Well, no, because this is part of the big thing. First of all, we asked for documents from the school district, and they said they didn't have any. And now we've discovered a bunch that they had.
Yeah, maybe if people aren't familiar with the particulars of the Public Records Act in the state, first of all, it's a weak, toothless law. But additionally, it's possible to withhold documents with
certain reasons,
Yeah.
for certain predetermined qualified reasons. So you could say those documents exist, but we are not providing them to you because they are sensitive for
they're
personnel
medical
reasons,
records or
medical
something.
reasons, whatever. They did not say that. They said there are no records of this school investigating these complaints. There are no records. We now know that there are because we got them from another source later.
Yeah. And so there's that issue. But then the bigger thing is the question of, okay, so the one hand is the question of what did he do to people in his class? The other question is, what did the district do when these complaints came? And that's what we're investigating now. And people who dealt with some of these things are still running the district. So what was their responsibility to make sure more women didn't have to face this anxiety? So this is Loxie. She was in the podcast studio talking to us about, after the story came out, about the whole situation. And she described some of her frustration about reading the story about her.
What's scary to me and what Ashley discovered and reported in her article, and I think the thing that took my breath away the most was not the girls' accounts, but what the district policy is, the district and union policy is, and that quote of situations being handled at the, quote, lowest level possible.
Yeah, that was a real striking part of the story, which basically revealed that if you have a complaint like this, that the deal with the union and the school district policy is to try to handle it at the lowest level possible, make sure it doesn't have to go all of them to headquarters. And I can see the attractiveness of that, policy, right? Like, let's handle it. Let's not make a big deal out of some things. But this seems like something that should have been made a big deal of.
Yeah, I mean, one complaint comes in and you handle it at that level, but if they pile up over decades or a decade, that seems like something that should be kicked up the ladder.
Yeah.
Well, and that's the issue with not kicking things up the ladder, is there is no third party that recognizes, oh, wait, there's a lot of people alleging things that are very similar, spanning multiple years and different people's, employment tenure.
Okay. We have a lot more Voices of the Year on the site. You can search San Diego Voices of the Year, Voice of San Diego's Voice of the Year 2017 on the Google, and get it there. It's also featured on the homepage, voicessandiego.org. There's one last one I wanted to bring up, and I kind of muscled this one into. I used executive privilege. This was Joseph McCrae. Joseph is the guy, the sign guy. He's the guy that first, after the Chargers moved last year, decided to move to L.A., he showed up at this meeting with this welcome meeting. The Dean Spanos, the president of the Chargers, was speaking, and some of the players to their throngs of LA fans. And this guy stood up and heckled him. And after that, the heckling turned into him holding signs, and he decided to take that and turn it into a real protest, and raised like $20,000 on GoFundMe. And then I think he put on a kind of a masterclass of modern media. He built up this incredible social media following, and he's on all over sports radio. And then he hired these airplanes to do the banners above the stadium. And the reason I think, look, he's not going to change it. The Chargers aren't going to move back because of what he did. But I think like they did something really abruptly. They tried to extort the city in a way, the NFL and the Chargers, and then they left. And they needed to feel it. They needed to feel the burden of what they had done. And they really did. I mean, I haven't seen a sort of meme or whatever, a local sports just protest turn into something this big around the country.
Yeah, he really got to them, it sounds like.
Yeah.
I mean, there was a real little panic there within the NFL about what he was doing, which is kind of amazing.
Yeah, John Horn at 10 News got a hold of documents from the FAA, the Federal Aviation Administration, where the NFL had pushed them to block these flights, to not let these flights go. I mean,
which would have been done automatically were the stadium just a few thousand seats bigger. And it would have been had the Chargers not closed some of the seats in their stadium to because they can't really sell them that well. It's just perfect.
All worked out perfectly.
Perfect.
Yeah, and it's just this discussion too, just about how bad the rollout in LA has gone. Just I find it captivating, obviously, but it's this guy was at the center of propelling that discussion and articulating a lot of what people were feeling about how bad this whole thing left a taste in people's mouths. So, all right, so there's a bunch more. Again, have something on Soccer City. We've got a few other people in town that we think you should care about if you didn't already know about them. So check it out. Go to voicesofsandiego.org. And this is going to be the last show for a little while for our amiga Sarah Libby. She's going to go bring humans into the world, or one.
Just one human, I'm hoping.
Yes.
You never know.
Yes.
So I feel like a few weeks ago we had the foresight to be like, oh, they're totally going to make a decision on vacation rentals, except what if they don't?
Yeah.
I'm at that point where I'm like, yeah, I'm about to have a baby, except what if I'm pregnant forever?
Forever.
Yeah.
That's what it feels like.
That would be something.
Yeah, that's my thing now. I'm just the person who's been pregnant for 4 years.
Well, they all call it 9 months. It's not 9 months.
It's 10 months.
Yeah, it's a long
I feel
time.
very strongly about this.
Yeah.
500 months.
Well, we can't wait to meet.
Sarah described herself to me today as 100 months pregnant.
You still won't tell us the name.
No.
Especially not on the podcast.
No.
She's been guarding this like in the vault. She usually tells me things that I push on, but
she was convinced that I was going to steal her name.
Yeah, I
literally were.
So all I know is that her baby's name is not going to be Callum.
Yeah, that's a great hint. It's not Callum.
Well, obviously, her What We Learned column is a fan favorite for a lot of people. What We Learn each week gets people's blood pressure up a little bit, but also is beloved by a lot of people. So we'll put that on hiatus. Andy and I are cooking up something that we might be able to pull off sporadically. No, we will do it. We'll see what we can figure out. But I just want to say Sarah is invaluable around here, and we're very excited to meet her child and to see all the great takes she has over the coming months. So
there's going to be some takes.
All right. So Happy New Year to everybody. We are not no show next week for the between the Christmas and New Year week, and we'll be back in 2018 to explain and investigate. This has been the Voice of San Diego on podcast.
The Voice of San Diego podcast is part of the Voice of San Diego podcast network. Visit voiceofsandiego.org/podcast to learn more about the Cura Chaos show about movers and shakers on both sides of the border, Beer Talk Radio, our business shows Startup Vault and I Made It in San Diego, and the rest of the shows in the network. If you like the show, go to voiceofsandiego.org and click the donate button. Or if you'd like to sponsor it, contact me at kinsey@vosd.org. That's KINSEE@vosd.org.